Thank you for joining us for this Knowledge Exchange UK session. I'm going to call it a session rather than a seminar because it's going to be quite interactive with UKRI around enterprise fellowships. Just let me lay out a little bit of how this session is going to work. We're going to have a couple of presentations from Tony and James from UKRI, and then we're going to go into breakout groups because I know that Tony, James, and the team, Norian and Richard, really want your thoughts and insights into how best to make this scheme work. So after 25 minutes or so, we'll go into a breakout room. That will come back to the main room after 25 minutes. So a couple of presentations, chance for one or two questions after those presentations, then breakout groups, and then back for any final questions at the end of the session. So that's the way we plan to run the webinar. It will be recorded so people can catch at least the first part prior to the discussion groups. So without further ado, I'm going to say thank you for the team from UKRI for coming along and engaging with the community. And I'm going to pass over to Tony, who's going to share some slides, give some presentations, make some introductions before we get onto the Q&A and the breakout groups. Thanks, Tony.
Thank you, Stuart. Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for joining today. Really appreciate it. Great to be working with KUK on this. It was a pleasure to work with you. So thank you very much for facilitating this, partnering us on this. So welcome everyone. As I said, we really welcome people's input into this. So my name is Tony Soteria. I'm Director of Commercialisation for UKRI and working with James. And if James, you want to introduce yourself?
So I'm James. I'm in the UKRI Central Talent Team, working with Tony in developing this fellowship.
Thank you. So what we plan to do is just to go through a bit of a presentation to give you the background and sort of the policy aims and where we are with our thinking on this. And then, so I'll start and then I'll pass over to James. Just let me share my screen. Just maybe 1 second while I do that.
Brilliant, Tony. We can see that perfectly.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you. So this will give the structure of the presentation. So background, key questions, and we come back after the breakout rooms and discussion for some of the sort of next steps. So Enterprise Fellowships is the new program that we're developing. It was announced as part of the budget, and the announcement was that there would be 100 world-class researchers being supported to spin out their ideas into flourishing businesses. So a clear policy objective there. The idea of the fellowships is really to support academic-based researchers to bide their time out. And one of the questions is how do we target exactly the right sort of stage? But the kind of thinking we're at the moment is sort of post proof of concept or late proof of concept. That's pre-incorporation proof of concept. And have a clear sort of idea of both the commercial validity and the technical validity of their potential product, process or service. And also where they're at the right stage that that timeout will be used beneficially, either part-time or it could be full-time. I think we're thinking up to 2 years. And that time will be used to help actually incorporate and create and set up the new venture. Worth just saying that we are open to the types of ventures. So obviously with spin-outs, but it could also be not-for-profit or social ventures or other types of ventures here. And importantly, where appropriate, we're really keen that we work with the sort of the host institutions and the partnerships to allow those fellows to return back to their academic posts. And again, that could be full-time or part-time, where they want to. Obviously, that may not always happen, but where they want to, we're really keen for that to happen. And some of the questions as we come on to is about how do we support that. Intended outcomes from the fellowship. So what are we going to be judged upon in terms of measuring success, and what are we measuring success is? So obviously creation of new and successful ventures. Now obviously there's a time lag for understanding successful ventures. But clearly that's what we want to be achieving here. And we're particularly here for this scheme, aligning those ventures to the IS8 priority areas. So that's something that this scheme is focused only on the IS8 programs initially. We want there to be, at the end of the fellowships, clear pathways for those ventures attracting investment. Again, flexible what that looks like, but we do want that clear pathways for that sort of venture gaining that venture support. We want the fellows to have experience, of course, practical hands-on experience of commercialization and setting up a venture. And one of the aims that is going to be harder to measure is that increased permeability between academia and non-academic careers and spin out. So ideally, we certainly would like to see fellows returning back to academics and not being disadvantaged in that way. And so the last slide before I pass over to James, I think it's around target audience. So who are the target audience for this, for the actual undertaking the fellows? So we are thinking about academics who have a doctoral or other equivalent expertise and experience, have done the preceding work around proof of concept and setting up that sort of initial market validation, etc., to know that a venture is the right commercialization path. So it's so they have done proof of concept, or maybe done ICUR or something like that, but I've understood that the venture is the right route for their commercialization journey and be at the appropriate stage of that commercialization, and wanting to explore commercialization activities as part of their sort of professional development and career. And then the projects that they will be undertaking is a new successful venture or social enterprise, charitable organisation. So we are open to what that venture might be, aligns to the IS8, and will be to develop a new product, process, or service and deliver that to the market, and be deemed to be suitable around that venture creation. So I think I'm stopping there and passing over to James, I think, next.
Yeah, thank you, Tony. So I'm going to talk a bit about sort of the proposed support and how a bit about the delivery model before going on to highlighting the key questions where some feedback would be really appreciated. So in terms of sort of the funding support that we're considering, so we've said here, so it's around £150,000 per fellow, with that supporting a fellow for between 12 and 24 months on a full-time or a part-time basis. We've said kind of upwards from 0.5 FTE, which is in line with the UKRI fellowship framework. In terms of those awards, this links a bit to the delivery model, but that's sort of, it's an average, right? So you expect that some will cost more than that and some will cost less, but sort of as a whole, we're expecting it to be around that much. In line with the announcement at the budget, looking to fund 100 starts over the spending review period, so that's around 25 per year. And the funding and support that's included in those 25 starts will be inclusive of what's needed to support the training and networking of the fellows. So the training in sort of commercialization, entrepreneurial activity, and also support for networking him into the right groups to support the creation of the successful venture and getting on further funding, etc. In terms of the delivery model, which is on the next slide, as Tony alluded to earlier, we're really looking to focus these in areas that are associated with the industrial strategy 8 priority areas. So we'll be delivering these through existing investments. So it won't be an open call that people are applying to UKRI to do. What we'll be doing is identifying existing IS8 aligned programs, so large multi-partner programs such as innovation and knowledge centres, creative clusters, activities associated with local innovation partnerships and networks, etc. So large existing programs that are working in IS8 priority programs and that have the potential to generate projects that can lead to a successful venture, or at the point already where they have projects and activities, or at the point where they could benefit from holding enterprise fellowship funding. So these existing investments will then hold the funding and will carry out a process by which they identify the fellows which could most likely benefit from holding the fellowships. Obviously, the investments we're looking to support would need to have a duration of funding that extends beyond the length of the fellowship, so for more than 2 years. So in terms of the existing programs are already running. It will be those that have the funding for that period of time. But then also over the sort of the next 4 years of the SR program, as new programs start, we'll be looking to identify those that can most likely benefit and gain added value from holding these fellowships. In addition to those things, as I say, we also want them to be able to demonstrate that they can make the case for appropriately supporting the training and development and networking of the fellows as well. I think the next slide goes into a bit more detail about the delivery model. So in terms of these investments are allocated to fellowship funding. So as I say, that we expect them to run the process to identify the most appropriate fellows. So that we expect this process to be open and rigorous and involving people who are in a position to judge whether or not the venture is at a point where it's likely to be successful. We also want them to have a process in place where the reallocation of money that's allocated to fellows can be put in place. So we want to support both fast failure and sort of rapid success. So if it's the case that someone's supported through an enterprise fellowship within the first few months of the award, it becomes apparent that actually a new venture isn't the most appropriate way to do this, then we'd want a process by which that funding stops and can be reused to a new fellow that's identified. And similarly, if it's clear that a new venture has been created and it's at the point where follow-on funding is likely, then again that's kind of met the outcome that Tony was referring to earlier, and again we'd expect that money to be reinvested in a new fellowship. So we're not looking to support fellows who effectively moved into a CEO role or CTO role in an established company. We're not at that point where the future funding is looking in place. We'd expect a new fellow to be supported. And then lastly, the organisations also need to be able to demonstrate that the fellows who are supported in this way are able to return to their academic role in either a full or part-time basis. So part-time if they want to continue in a role within the new venture as well, but that in that return they're not having a negative impact on their academic career. So the next slide just go into the bit about the questions that we're hoping to address through the breakout sessions. So the first one is around the sort of the targeting point that Tony mentioned. So how do we most appropriately or most effectively target the funding to where it's most useful? So Tony said post proof of concept, how do we do that, and what are the things we need to ask organisations to look out for when targeting in that way? Secondly, sort of what support do fellows need to be most successful in this? And then thirdly, how do we make sure that fellows are recognised for the activity they're doing this, even if the creation of the new venture isn't successful? And then how do they support them to return to the academic role in a way that doesn't disadvantage them, again, even if they want to continue on in a role in whatever new venture is created. So the next 3 slides just dig into those questions in a bit more detail, and then we'll have a bit of time at the end just for questions before we go into the discussions. But what are the key points to consider across all the questions is sort of how will the answers differ depending on sort of the area, so which IS8 aligned area is being considered, as we're expecting the needs for a new venture in sort of the creative industries is likely to look quite different to one in the life sciences or quantum, whatever. So what differences do we need to look out for, and how do we ensure there's flexibility to account for those? How can we, and what should we be asking of organisations in identifying sort of how fellowship should stop? So this bit around the fast failure or the early access and reusing the success and reusing the money. And then lastly, sort of what should we expect in terms of the lead time? So yes, we may identify investments that can hold the funding, but once an organisation holds the funding, how long should we expect it to? What is reasonable for us to expect in terms of the time that it then takes them to identify a relevant fellow or fellows to support through the funding? And then lastly, is a sort of the proposed duration, FTE, average sort of value. What do you expect that to be able to cover in terms of the support that's needed? Then on the third question, which is the one around the return. So again, so what can we do to make sure that people aren't disadvantaged when they return back into that academic role? And again, is that going to differ between innovation areas? And particularly, I think what are the existing organisational policies and frameworks that exist that address this? So we know that different places address this issue differently in terms of how entrepreneurial commercialisation activities are recognised within sort of HR frameworks and promotion frameworks, etc. So are there any good examples of this that we can pick out when we're thinking about requests that we as UKRI can make to say, if someone's holding this award, then these are the expectations around sort of their ongoing academic role. So what can we do to incorporate that and make sure that people aren't disadvantaged in this way? So those are the three key areas. We've got time for a few questions now if people want any sort of clarity on any of those bits. Or Tony, have I missed anything there that's worth drawing out?
No, I think that's really helpful, James. Happy to take any questions we bring out to the breakout rooms.
Sure. There was one question in the chat around FEC for the figure that you mentioned. I say you can find the Q&A box either at the bottom or under the more. Equally, because we've got this kind of group, do feel free to put your hand up using the kind of icons at the bottom if you want to ask any questions.
So just on the FEC point, it's likely to be at 80% in line with sort of wider UKRI funding. This is one area, sort of exactly what the funding covers is a bit we're sort of finalising the detail at the moment, but it's likely to be that standard 80% in line with other bits.
Thank you, James, for clarifying that. Thank you for those presentations, which I think have been quite clear to date, hence no questions. So what I propose we do is that we can move on to the breakout session if you want, Tony, or do you want to sort of say any more? So the way this will work is in a minute, Owen will press a magic button and everybody will go into 4 different breakout rooms. We'll then allocate the UKRI team, so they will join you shortly afterwards. It may take us a minute just to be involved in those conversations. And the UKRI team will sort of remind you of those questions, I suspect. And then there'll be a time set. I think we've set it for 25 minutes where you can then be kicked out of those rooms mid-conversation. So just be mindful you don't finish off a sentence when you're in the move, and then we'll come back and there can be more chance for Q&A. So unless there are any more comments, I think, Owen, we press the magic button and we start the breakout room process. So I think everybody's now re-entering the main room. And we'll just give a few seconds for that tech to happen. So we've got now, I think, Tony, time for, we're not going to do formal feedback from those breakout rooms, but there's a chance to ask questions or pose comments from around the room, I think. Tony?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we're not, I don't know, I'm sure the other facilitators did a better job than I did because we didn't actually focus and go through the questions in a very structured way. So one thing I would say is that I'd like to share the questions in the presentation and really invite comments. We'll share some email contact details, myself and James, and invite comments post this session. So we didn't necessarily go through, we did have some really helpful comments and suggestions though in this conversation, but it wasn't as perhaps as structured, and that was my fault. So I think just one thing, if everyone's happy, that we will share the presentation and the opportunity to feed in and suggest things and ask questions is open post this session as well.
And Tony, we can put those onto the website so that other people can access those too. There is time for 1 or 2 questions if people want to pose them. I think will benefit everybody. So do use the Q&A or for that. I should have stressed at the start that we're really grateful for UKRI sharing their thoughts at the earliest stage. I think you probably got the sense in the discussion groups that they're very much wanting to work with the community to help make something that works, which I think is brilliant for funders to do that rather than just to sort of do that in the absence of that input. So I know that all of the thoughts and comments in those discussion groups will be picked up by the team at UKRI. So yeah, I'm not seeing any questions coming to the Q&A, so I think you've probably given people lots of things to think about. Or there's one coming through there about a question about, it's in the chat, can the spin-out be structured as a joint venture? So the idea of actually what do you mean by a spin-out that could be supported in this realm, and are there any kind of limitations on the structure of the vehicle at the end of it?
So we're not putting limitations on the structure of the venture, and to be honest, and I said it could potentially be a joint venture, it could be a not-for-profit, it could be a social enterprise, etc. So we aren't putting those constraints. That would need to be a local level to decide whether that pathway is appropriate, really. And part of this will be to decide on what how to set that venture up appropriately, part of the fellowship. So, but we're not putting the constraints on the type of venture. James, are you happy with that answer?
Yeah, that makes sense. I think it's in line with what I was saying. So I really want things to be as flexible as possible within sort of the outcomes that we're looking for.
It strikes me that you have a really tricky job to do to try and make good things happen and provide some structure that sort of steers that going on. So Liam's just posted, any particular infrastructure being considered to provide mentoring or education, or is that per fellow? So this question that we sort of got to in our group about what's the best way of providing support. What's your thinking? What constraints do you have around the infrastructure for mentoring and education?
James, do you want to do that one, or should I do that one?
So I think that's part of I think we recognise it's going to be, again, it's going to be quite variable between organisations, right? So I think some places are going to have well-established programs that they, as part of their organisation, that people can access. Others may already be like buying it in from other providers to provide it, or need support doing that. So I think what we'll be looking for is sort of places to make the case of what support is going to be available, either in-house or using the funding to provide access to other appropriate training. Equally, so we're in discussions in UKRI around sort of stages of ICA that people could potentially access, and with conversations with others around access to their programs, which we're just sort of looking at the details at the moment. So I think it's going to be a combination really of places identifying just what the best source of that is, and then using the funding to address that. But we're not looking to specify a particular way of doing it. Does that cover everything, Tony?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, absolutely.
So unless there are other questions, I'm just giving Tony advance notice that I might throw the microphone to Tony and James at the end to think about what your key messages and next steps you might want to sort of communicate are. Unless there are any other questions that come in through the chat or the Q&A, I might just pose that question to James and Tony. So what was the key message you wanted to impart, and what are the next steps from your side of things?
Yeah, should I go first, James, on that one? So in terms of next steps, first of all, so as I say, we really welcome comments post the session on any of the questions or any thoughts, and there's some useful suggestions, for example, about other schemes, for example, in I think it was Austria, to look at that doing similar things. And obviously, we're talking to the Royal Academies as well around their schemes. So this is very much sort of a thing in motion. So please do feed through any comments. In terms of our direct next steps, are people sort of familiar with the IS8 and UKRI priority programs that are being established? But maybe it's just a quick word about that. So those are being established by UKRI in what is slightly bizarrely called bucket 2 of UKRI's allocations. And directors for each of the IS8 programs are being appointed. Many are in post now. And for each of those, program boards are being created, and that's UKRI, but other government departments and other organisational bodies are coming together in each of those IS8 areas. So we are working with those directors and those program boards to identify a couple of things. First of all, are they clear, and do they think that the initiative in here, the intervention that we're focused on in develop academic-based ventures, helps them deliver their IS8 objectives? And if they do, then we're really interested in talking to them. Secondly, what existing investments that link into those IS8s are available across UKRI. So we're having those conversations, and then there'll be conversations about actually how do we then work with the potential investments to express interest in delivering these fellowships for us. So that's our sort of practical next steps within UKRI. And then, as I said, we're obviously working with other organisations such as World Academies and other people around how we actually finesse some of the arrangements for these fellowships. James, anything you want to add in terms of next steps there?
No, I think that covers everything in terms of next steps. So I think from the feedback in our discussions, one of the things which I think was probably reflected elsewhere, is just looking to make sure that, given the different IS8 areas and the different environments people are operating in, to make sure that we can be as flexible as possible in kind of how the funding's used, and also making sure just we can get information out to people as quickly as we can, which is noted, and we're doing our best.
Apologies, Ona's just I can't see all the questions that came into the Q&A, so Ona's just alerted me to a couple. So IS8, just to demyth that language, is the Industrial Strategy 8 core themes, which are available online if you Google search those. this scheme, I think there's a question about whether it's for early career researchers exclusively, and from the tone of the discussion, I think it's for anybody with a good idea, from what I can tell. Tony, is that fair?
That is right. The point was made in our breakout around practicalities about what the funding will be able to support.
Right.
But you're right, this is not only aimed at early career researchers, it's aimed at any career, but acknowledging that 150 FEC would only buy so much for a very senior academic. But I think that's fine. You know what I mean? It doesn't have to be, you know, full time for 2 years. It could be less. But yeah, I think that was a good point made in our one.
And then the final comment, just to clear up, which we discussed in our breakout group, was around, will you directly invite eligible programs? And our understanding in our group was that it will be focused on the industrial strategy themes and open in that sense, but not open to things outside of the industrial strategy themes, so that you wouldn't be inviting particular applications, but you would be identifying areas where applications are welcome. Is that a fair summary?
That's exactly right. And if I give you an example, and this is just an example, so you know, so if we take creative industries, for example, we will work with creative industries program to identify the existing investments around, you know, for example, clusters or whatever, and then we will work with those investments to ask the kind of questions around their environment, about, you know, the kind of questions that we're posing, and we will work on an allocation basis on that. So it won't be an open invite per se. It will be sort of a targeted, specific invite to appropriate and eligible investments within the IS8 area. James, anything else you want to add to that? I said that clearly.
Yeah, no, that's fair. Yes, it's identifying organisations that are likely to benefit from, and then inviting them to kind of make a case as to how they can use the funding to meet the outcomes that we're after. So yeah, targeted in that way.
Now we have questions coming in left, right, and centre. So apologies. So and apologies that for some reason I haven't been able to see all of the questions. So I think again this was discussed in our breakout group. So I'm aware that the discussions might have been slightly varying across those groups. One about, is the environment for venture creation one of the criteria for allocating these fellowships? So if you're in an environment that doesn't have a very strong venture creation, would you be at a disadvantage? And from my understanding of the discussion so far, that is not a sort of consideration, but how you therefore use the funding will sort of play into that sort of environment, and will be taken into account that if you're in an environment that isn't got lots of support, then that will form part of the use of the funds, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, this will go back to choosing the appropriate existing investments, really. So obviously, you know, the limited opportunities and fellowships, and we want to be choosing those existing investments that have partnerships that are, you know, able to support the venture creation.
And then I think the final question that's coming to me, although I see there's one about the public criteria that shows what IS8. So where can people find more information about the IS8 programs that will be relevant?
So in sorry, Tony.
Do you go, James? Do you go?
I just say in terms of IS8 areas, so there's, if on the UKRI webpage, there's a bit around sort of the explain around the allocations process, and as Tony said, that the ones that are sitting in the appropriate bucket, it lists out there what the different IS8 areas are, and then the programs within that. So that information's on there. In terms of sort of how, like, which investments are going to be holding these, I think as part of the information things that are published, you know, there will be set criteria that IS8 boards will be looking to make sure that organisations address, and then they will be asked a clear set of sort of questions around making the case for why they're appropriate to hold them. So that can be addressed through that way. Sorry, Tony.
Tony, are you happy?
No. Yeah, absolutely. I'm just finding a link I was going to post a link.
There we go.
Absolutely, yes.
And then there's one final question, which I think is probably a good one to sort of round off on. So somebody just says, what's the primary problem that this scheme is trying to solve? And I think that's probably a good way to round off the session, is just to re-emphasize why these enterprise fellowship schemes are being devised, what they're hoping to achieve at the highest level.
James, do you want to do that one, or do you want me to do that one?
Do you want to go for that one?
No,
it's more your space.
But yeah, it's a really good question. It really is to address the couple of key barriers that have been identified in a number of reports, including the independent review of university spinouts, and that is helping to de-risk an academic to develop a venture, and ideally not disadvantage of academic career, and to provide the time and space and training to develop a venture. So they're the key things that this is aiming to do, is to provide the time and space for an academic to step out of their main academic duties for at least part-time to develop a venture that hopefully will go out and have a better chance of getting investment and be successful.
So thank you, Tony. That's really helpful. Thank you to the UKRI team, Richard, Maria, and James. As you can tell, UKRI are keen to make this work and to get input from people that are going to help identify and support those individuals with these great ideas. We thank people in the delegates for this webinar as well for giving your thoughts and expertise. And just to summarise that, we will provide more information after this webinar, and I know Tony and the team are very keen to have more information and more thoughts come their way as you see fit. So with that, we'll leave you to get on with your lunch. Thank you for your participation and time, and we'll see you all soon.
Thank you. Please do send us comments. Thank you so much for everyone's time. Really appreciate it. And thank you again, Stuart, and the team at UK.
Smashing. Thanks all.